Hi, my name is Jeff Hickman. I'm the head of customer engineering with Ory. Ory is a modern, open source based identity and access management system, focusing primarily on consumer identity and access management, but being able to do it all. We're a platform that's designed to make it really easy for you to integrate any of your identity needs with your current existing stack, whether that be web based or what we're going to talk about today, more agentic focused as well, which is kind of the new frontier where most organizations are looking at. So happy to chat with you about what that means and why we're partnering with Skyfire.
Hey, my name is Ankit. I'm the head of engineering at Skyfire, and Skyfire is an exciting new platform where our goal is to give agents identity and payment capabilities so they can autonomously go out onto the web and do things for us. And we're really excited to partner with Ory. They're the best in class solution for authentication and authorization. And together with Skyfire, we are building a next generation platform where agents can autonomously go out on the web, discover new services, create accounts, log in, and then pay for goods and services.
Hi, my name's Craig. I am the co-founder of Skyfire. What that means is agents can now create accounts, they can access tools, and pay for services completely on the fly. AI agents are the next frontier of users, and that presents a lot of problems, but also a lot of opportunities, both on development side and on the enterprise side. And so agents don't really look like humans. They don't fit exactly into the human flows, but there are existing standards that work today for authentication that don't necessarily need to be completely reinvented. And what Skyfire brings to the table is something new, and that is now there's a way for these agents to sign up for services and these agents to be able to pay for services alongside that existing authentication, but you still need a critical piece, and that is the providers of those credentials and that authentication. And that's really where the Ory Skyfire partnership started, at least from my perspective.
Ory's goal is not to really do much in the agentic space except for authentication authorization. Like our goal is to be the vehicle using the existing protocols and stuff like that. That's where we want to be. So we want to be that plug and play piece for people to use, but at the same time, be able to have great partnerships like this to offer our customers, best of breed solutions. Ory really came out of a desire or kind of a look at the industry that identity is hard. And it's been hard for a really long time to do right. There's a lot of solutions in the market today that address identity-based solutions, but all of them have trade-offs, ups and downs. A lot of systems are kind of black box. You throw things in and you get something back out and you're unable to see what it's really about. Some of them are rigid in their opinion on how you're supposed to do things. Other of them are loose, meaning that they kind of cut corners to make things easier and don't necessarily follow specifications. And what Ory aimed to do was to generate an identity system that could handle those challenges that people have with identity, offering scale, which is really hard to achieve. So being able to handle, millions upon hundreds of millions of logins per day or per week, the reliability that needs to come with that to make sure that there's, near zero downtime with it. And then also being able to handle the flexibility, observability, and control that organizations want at an enterprise scale.
Yeah, so a major problem that we see with AI platforms and AI agents is that there's been a lot of advancements in terms of being able to find services and understand how to connect to those services, especially with what's happened in the MCP space. But a huge problem exists to where in order to have the credentials to access that service in the first place, a human being has to be involved. And what that process looks like today is a human being has to go to a website, they have to fill out a form, maybe swipe a credit card after you pick the right plan, generate an API key, and then create credentials that you can then plug into your agent. What Skyfire allows is a standardized way for that agent to deliver information on itself and the user behind it to any service, to have an account created on the fly, which then allows them to receive back credentials to access those tools like a normal user. And at some point in the flow, a payment is required. And that's also where Skyfire comes into play. Using that same approach, Skyfire can allow an agent to consummate a payment, whether it's an e-commerce checkout or calling a tool on the fly to be able to consummate a transaction. And what we need is someone who is actually best in breed at being able to facilitate that credential piece and that standard authentication. And that's why we're really excited to be here with Ory.
Yeah. So as Ory evolved and grew into a larger company too, and we start looking at the changes, we've always kind of tried to be ahead of where the identity space is going, whether that's things like passkeys. OpenID Connect is where we started with more modern federation standard. And then here comes Agentic. And when we looked at that, we really realized that, hey, our play in this is to help that industry use existing standards. Don't reinvent the wheel where we can. If we have to reinvent, we will, right? But in the meantime, let's use existing standards and let's build upon those to build something that can handle the authentication needs for agents. And I think the piece out there that a lot of people are kind of a little bit glazing over on right now is the scale angle of this. Something that's come up recently in a lot of conversations I've been having too, which is what excites us, is as we partner with organizations like Skyfire, and as we're looking at what that's going to unlock. If you look at what was just said about being able to do payments for you, being able to autonomously work out exactly what services are needed and do that, you've now taken an individual who is one person, one login, and sometimes you've tripled that, if not quadrupled it, right, from an interaction standpoint. So if you don't have an identity system that can handle that scale backing you up, then you're going to run into a lot of issues as you try to enable your services to be AI agent compatible on that side.
I mean, when we think about agent workflows, right, in an agentic world, almost like a human becomes the leader of their own team because they can have many agents working for them, right? And so they become like a conductor. And so that adds a lot of scale or like performance needs because you just have a higher volume of accounts and higher volume of actors. The other thing is like agents are kind of the next generation evolution of automation. And so we feel that, we started out like very long ago with like cron jobs and then all the way to like modern platforms like Zapier and stuff like that, which are doing automated workflows, no code, low code platforms. And now you come in agents where they have reasoning built in. So you don't have to write a lot of stuff. They can help you reason. And then the other thing is, for the very first time, you can actually just type in English or say it in English what you want done. So it's almost like a general purpose software agent. And so now we feel like the number of people that can actually automate things just explodes. You don't have to be a programmer or someone familiar with a computer to be able to automate. And so that basically, I feel like unlocks like a whole new set of users and a lot more volume. And then finally, these agents are doing things so fast where they're doing things like 10x faster than a human would. And that, again, increases the scale just in terms of the number of interactions that are happening per second or what have you. So I think like there's just this huge explosion. I think Jeff definitely hit it on the head in terms of scalability is huge.
Even if you don't anticipate the scale that, just your service may not be that large to start with, you're just starting out, you're just a startup and you go, we're not going to, everyone has aspirational goals, right? We want to hit to a certain piece. The challenge that we see in the market with authentication around this specifically too, is that if it's an open service that's discoverable, you're going to hit that probably sooner than you think on that side. And so being prepared for that, even if you're not at some crazy scale, like you're not number 2 on the, index for top hit websites, it's still a lot to think about early on. And having a platform that's already kind of designed for that, especially if you hit that magic number, right? You hit that right spot is a great way to go.
Thanks, Jeff. My take on the scale aspect of this is that there are going to be millions of agents completing tasks. And so from a developer perspective, you want to be in a position to where you can manage those agents and give them the kind of autonomy that they need to actually get the job done. And so that's really where having a way for them to sign up for accounts, having them have the ability of authenticating, and then in some cases make a payment becomes critical. But the other side of this is if you are building a service and you're trying to get some scale yourself, agents become a viable user group. And that's a new phenomenon. And in that sense, you need a way of being able to accept them as first-class citizens. And that means agents sign up. That means giving a standardized way for them to have credentials to access your service, and then also accept payment for them. And that is kind of a key piece of this partnership, is being able to allow sign up, but also have standardized authentication to be able to access those services in a way where it's easy for the service or the merchant to turn that on with their existing authentication provider.
And just, one thing just to go on to what Craig said, it kind of reminded me, like there's also like a massive simplification potentially happening here, where, previously human users and programmatic users were just separate classes. Like human users used a username and password, they used auth, they get access, and then programmatic users had API keys and client credentials, and they followed their own workflow. And basically companies were managing these two things completely separately. And now with agents, and the workflow that we described with Ory, both humans and agents can follow the same workflow. And so to a certain extent, I feel like maybe API keys, client credentials, things like that potentially go away because an agent can log in just like a human, get the OAuth token and access the APIs based on that versus having a whole different set of authentication and authorization for platforms. So there's, I think, a massive simplification here potentially happening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, as we look at different organizations out there doing things in the agentic space, you really look for people who have a clear vision about what they want to achieve rather than those who are just kind of riding the coattails of what's popular, right? You get a lot of that too. And so when you talk to a bunch of different organizations, you kind of really quickly hear those who have an idea that's really interesting, and that really aligns well with what we see in the industry, aligns with our own opinions about things as well. And I think from the early days of the conversations with Skyfire that we had was, that's everything you're saying are the same notes that we're thinking and we're seeing in the industry, and it's really refreshing to hear people talk about that, because then you can align really quickly and build the same type of vision together and how that works for organizations. And I think that's been a kind of throughout this partnership has been one of the kind of the guiding pieces of that. I mean, there's been a lot of conversations back and forth where we've thrown technical ideas around. Some of that having to do with, just the MCP standard itself evolving, right? And being able to throw ideas back and forth and going, hey, there's a new draft that came out this week. What are we going to do? It changes things, and kind of working off of that, which I think has led itself to just show the strength of the partnership, that the vision is really carrying over some of the technical implementations at times, right? Where, hey, the technical, we're going to figure it out. But because we both have the way that this should work, we're working with all those pieces on that side.
Yeah, so MCP kind of really changed the game, right? And it came about, like as Jeff kind of alluded to, it came about while we were still kind of developing our partnership with Ory. Actually, we started talking with Ory, I think, even before MCP really started to take off. And so we were thinking more APIs, and then MCP came along and it integrates really well with agents. I think, and Jeff will probably talk more about this, but I think like MCP is definitely an evolving standard. So we're really excited to contribute what we're doing to it. I think what I'm seeing in the agent space right now, and it kind of makes sense in terms of the growth, is that it's still very human centric. So you'll see a lot of demos out there where, to a certain extent, less or more, the human still tends to be the agent, kind of directing the agent to do something. And so I feel like the MCP protocol is also kind of evolving from starting from that. And what we are really seeing is a future where agents are truly autonomous. So I think we really hope to contribute to the MCP standard in that way together, where we can kind of make autonomous agentic workflows, part of the protocol as well.
I think those are all great points. And to that end, I think with MCP specifically, there is a bit still to be desired from an authorization and authentication standpoint in the standard. A lot of it right now is, I think, just kind of the natural, the context is you have a single MCP server that's bound to an agent, and if they have access to everything. It hasn't really evolved to that more granular level of control and things along those lines as you'd expect. I guess maybe the best analogy would be is to where like REST APIs are at, right? Where you can have an access token that has scopes to it that can define what it can access. It's not really there in the framework yet for MCP, but I think it's getting there. And those are some of the things I think that we want to start contributing towards with the specification itself is, what about those cases where I have a service that I want to have tiered access on? Do I have to run multiple MCP servers for my customers and tell them to point to one versus the other, depending on what tier they're on? And that's a possible solution, right? But that's a lot of overhead, right? And then we start talking about scale again and thinking about all the requirements that would go into that. A more elegant solution might be able to say, hey, for certain tool prompt or resource requests, I want this level of access token with these scopes on it to be there. If it doesn't have it, reject it. If it does, allow it. Maybe that might be a more granular approach that allows us to better serve the authentication and authorization needs. On that side, some of that can be done via middleware now. You can always implement things in code. Sky's kind of the limit sometimes around that, and the specification is open enough to allow that. But I think the industry will find as this evolves that you do need to be pretty explicit with what you allow, because otherwise you'll get into a lot of implementations that don't have any of these controls. And then that's a whole problem in of itself. So as the spec evolves, right, today we can launch and put access control around different things, right? But as the spec evolves, we'll continue to work forward with the MCP specifications to help define what that looks like. It's interesting because it kind of reminds me of some of the early days of, either OpenID Connect or FIDO when those were coming out. It's the same type of thing. The base spec comes around, it has some deficiencies, everyone kind of starts chiming in, and it takes a little bit of time for it to solidify, right? And for it to coalesce. The nice part about MCP is that there's a lot of movement behind it. There's a lot of people contributing, which is great which is why I love open source, right? In the first place, even, it just gives you that ability to see a much broader audience view than you would, with some commercial softwares on that side. So it really, I think, helps kind of these type of standards expressly as well, to make sure that they're well reviewed and well documented and actually work in the real world for people. So it'll be exciting to see. It's not perfect yet. Nothing ever is when it first comes out, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I think that the key benefits of MCP, specifically for AI agents, is really one around you now have standardized access to services, and that allows these context-aware autonomous workflows to take place. And Jeff is 100% right. Like, the authentication in terms of the scopes to access those tools is really, really important to get right. The piece where we come in is, well, how does an agent get the credential in the first place? And today that is complete manual with human beings going and generating those and signing up for those different services. And so, I think the benefits here is as MCP becomes more fleshed out and the authentication is correctly handled, the credentialing is correctly handled by industry experts like Ory, there is a new interface. Right? This is a new interface for new customers, and that is the MCP as itself is a channel for customers to both sign up and to pay using the kind of authentication that, enterprises kind of from how customers touch them today.
AI agents themselves, of developers developing them, I mean, there's always this kind of question that floats around of what's a good bot versus a bad bot. We'll see this a lot, like what identifies that. And you'll get, if you look at like Imperva or like Cloudflare, they have all these statistics around traffic right on the web around what's a good bot, what's a bad bot, and how those things, how they're identified. And a lot of times it's through the activity that they're doing, right? It's malicious intent, of requests. I think that line's going to get really hard to determine in the future, right? As more people are for side projects, or like myself even, I'll write AI agents to do things that I just don't want to do anymore. And I'll send them out there to do things, MCP servers, stuff like that. And I'm doing it as a hobbyist. Right. I may have more experience than others, but for the most part, I'm doing it as a hobbyist. And the challenge with that is that as a hobbyist, you're not necessarily aware of all the current ways to do things, best practices, specifications, things that are out there. You're just doing stuff that works for you. And sometimes that bleeds over into, startups and even large enterprise companies, as well as you're just trying to get something out to market quickly, right? Because you have to, right? On that side, and we've all been there, and, you'll eventually refactor that down the road and do the right thing. But there's always that time lag, right? Of hey, we just got something in the market. We need to do this right thing. And I think the challenge with that is that if you're not following the standards, if you're cutting the corners on those things, you can get quickly labeled as a bad bot. Right. And so I think it's extremely important. The thing I would tell developers is to really study like the specifications that are out there for MCP or other protocols as well that may come along, and the things that change, of trying to stay on top of that so you're following the best practices. There's a lot of language in the specification if you read it around must or may. Those two words are very important, right? Must, you must do it. Like it's not a soft word that they're using. It's a pretty like hard requirement on that side. May, yes, you have a little more flexibility, but it's always best, in my opinion, to err on the side of caution and implement it if you're able to, because that allows you to kind of make sure you're on that side of being identified as a good bot. Because the worst thing that would happen is you get this agent out there that you want to be doing something, and then it gets blocked by a WAF, a web application firewall somewhere, and it can't do it's no fault of your own technically, right? Because it's coded right, it does what it's supposed to do, but it's not following some specification that gets it flagged by someone. And so everything that we can do from a developer standpoint is trying to follow the best practices, as few sometimes as there may be out there, to ensure that we don't get caught in that type of trap.
So the flow of KYA is really one where, say, an agent discovers a service, probably via an MCP aggregator. It wants to connect to that MCP service so it can access the tools that are in there, but it doesn't have credentials. So what's required? A sign-up flow. Sign-up flow is really where KYA comes from. KYA standing for Know Your Agent. And that is a protocol that allows an agent to deliver information on itself as an agent, as well as for the principal behind that agent. That looks like first name, last name, phone number, email address, etc. It's essentially the same required fields that any merchant or service today requires when they're creating an account on behalf of a user. In this case, it's just an agent coming in and delivering that information. So the concept with KYA protocol is one where a verified identity is signed by a provider, in this case Skyfire, that can then be delivered over in a standardized envelope. And that envelope is a JWT. That JWT gives a lot of flexibility, whether it can be delivered via a header to a website, or via an API call, or via an MCP server. The provider who is providing the service now has the required information that they need to understand who this user is, to create an account and then follow the correct standards for actually delivering back credentials for authentication and authorization.
I think Craig gave a really good introduction. I think the other thing I'd just like to mention is that, something like we kind of alluded to before, that there's already very good protocols like OAuth and OIDC that exist. We really designed it to be very much complementary, like a token exchange. It's kind of like, human users signed up with an email and a password, maybe there's MFA in there, and an agent can sign up with a KYA token. So it's just another way to sign up, and then everything else stays the same. So that was really important for us to hopefully make the adoption easier and make the transition to an agentic commerce world easier.
I think actually, let me add one more point to that. I think that's also why it's important to partner with organizations that have a vision around this and kind of are building a company. A lot of things in technology, you can, given enough time and people, you can build it yourself. Right? There's a reason why people turn and purchase software over building it themselves, right? It's kind of an age-old argument you'll hear, build versus buy, right? Is always kind of come up. I think with AI agents specifically as well, because it's so new of a space, trying to build it yourself, while it looks on the surface as achievable, can be really risky. And I think a lot of that has to do with, like, when you go with an organization, that organization, when you buy a software from them, from a vendor, they have a vested interest in making sure all those things like, hey, does this look like a good bot? Does this behave in this way? Does this do this ethically and responsibly, and so on and so forth? They have a vested interest in that. That's what their company's built upon, right? Their reputation is built upon, right? And you kind of alleviate a lot of that risk when you do something along those lines. Just like identity in our space, directly, a lot of people say, well, I can build a username and password login myself. And yeah, you can, right? I'd argue you don't roll your own crypto. You shouldn't roll your own username and password authentication. Maybe the same thing with AI agents. Maybe you shouldn't roll it all yourself until things are maybe so easy that it's a couple button clicks, or maybe, hey, another AI agent can do it for you in the future. Maybe we'll get to that point and it will be that easy. But for now, I really think there's a lot of value in partnering with organizations who provide a lot of that risk avoidance and the technical know-how out of the box for you to hit that quicker pace, running a lot faster than trying to build it yourself.
I had one thing I wanted to share as well, like, to your question about, what developers should look out for. I think on both sides, right? The way we see the world is really like consumers and providers, or like buyers and sellers. And I think on both sides, like traditional software development or traditional, say, service usage has been very much around like, hey, like the service provider kind of specs out like, hey, this is how my service is supposed to be used. And you're supposed to call these 7 APIs in this order, and then something gets done, right? And on the buy side, the developer is also writing their consumer service in that way, following like a recipe or something. And now in come agents, and you've got this natural language processing going on. And wow, those 7 APIs get called randomly in different orders. And because that's, it's all probabilistic, right? And so I think there's, as developers, we have to also be even more careful about like how we are exposing our APIs, how we are kind of building our agents, so that things ultimately get done in the way that we expect them to, so that we can build trust in these agents and our services can be used in the way we expect them to. So like a lot of the standards like MCP and now even with websites, you have an LLM.txt file and stuff. Like there's all these ways to kind of resources and prompts and stuff to like expose how your service is supposed to be used and what's the correct way to do things and stuff. So I think it's going to be more and more important to be very, very specific. What you intend to be done and how you intend for it to be done. Because yeah, with agents, if there's ambiguity, you're likely to get bitten.
I have a question actually for Jeff and Ankit that I think people would be really interested in. So you both worked pretty closely together to come up with a working implementation of agent account creation, payment, and authentication. From a technical perspective, like what was the most difficult part of actually making that work?
I think I'm gonna give that to Jeff. He's done the heavy lifting on that piece.
Yeah, I think I don't want to just say like anything technically was really super difficult. What I think it more was anticipating some of the changes coming to the specification and trying to be conscious of building something that wasn't going to break on the next release of a specification. I mean, that's always a challenge when you're not writing the specification. As much as we try to influence and be involved, right? You can't always dictate the way things will go, right? So you try to build your solution around that can be modular enough that it's not necessarily impacted by changes. And I think at certain points during, building the solution together, we got hung up sometimes on, a new specification dropped, we got to change it. And it's like, well, wait a second. It's a draft. A couple of drafts never went to release and never made it into the final, right? So yes, that's there, but we should be focusing on what's released, what's out there, what's available, what people are actually building on that side. That being stated, there were a lot of just kind of changes in the way things were implemented initially with OAuth. Some stuff that the broader community doesn't agree with, like for example, Pixie, which is the PKCE, which is a way that you can do code verification on your flows for getting access tokens. A lot of people believe that because you have Pixie, you don't need what's called state. The spec is loose on that. It says optionally or may include from the OAuth spec. Ory believes it's still required because there's a chance there that it could still be intercepted. So we require that, but the TypeScript libraries for MCP don't. And same with the Python ones. So there's little things like that were technically challenging of how do we overcome that? Oh, we got to, let's interject this way and kind of move into that. But those are really just coding challenges of doing it in a way that won't break on the next release. It's really working around the evolution of a specification and stuff like that as well, which again, to my earlier comments, is another reason why you partner with organizations like ours, right? Is to kind of, we're looking at that all day long, right? Those are things that we're constantly, the spec changes, we email each other within, hours or minutes or if not days, right? About, hey, this changed. Do we need to do anything? Is there anything that we need to do around this? It's our jobs to do that versus you, an organization who might be doing 20, 30, 50 other things, right? On top of just this one piece of it.
So if you want to get started, go to Ory.sh. They have all your needs in terms of the Ory network, being able to use them as an authentication provider. To get started on Skyfire, go to app.skyfire.xyz, sign up. You can complete KYA, fund your agent, and get started making payments and monetizing your services today.
Ory and Skyfire also have a joint solution that we've made available currently for TypeScript and JavaScript, soon to be other languages as well, that give you a way to easily implement the kind of token exchange between the KYA token and Ory to be able to create accounts. It also gives you a fantastic middleware around your tools, prompts, and resources in your MCP that allows you to put the authentication, the scope checking, things like that at that level. It will still handle the specification level authorization for agents if you want that, or you can use just this at the resource level as well, depending on what you need as well. And you'll be able to find that on GitHub, and we can provide a link as a follow-up. You don't have to get the full Ory stack. You can just get Hydra. Right, you can just get the OAuth pieces of this and just do the tokenization piece of this. But I think that really depends on the customer's needs. It's the serious enterprises that will be engaged with as this evolves that then we can talk about, hey, just drop Hydra in. It's going to be cheaper for you and it still hits the same scale and all that fun sort of stuff.
Jeff, thank you for running so well. Awesome word bites. I think you have done this before. Wow.
Yeah, a couple of times. Yeah.
Jeff, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Have a good one. See you later. Bye.